The room buzzed with the low hum of murmured conversations, the air thick with a mix of tension and boredom. The courthouse was just another ordinary building on the outside, but inside, it felt like a stage where lives were being dissected and judged. People sat in rows of hard wooden benches, some nervously fidgeting, others staring blankly ahead, waiting for their names to be called. Among them was Maya Thompson, a woman whose presence seemed to command attention even in silence. She wasn't there for anything extraordinary, at least not by her standards. It was just a parking ticket, one she believed had been unfairly issued. But little did anyone know, this seemingly mundane day would spiral into something far greater. Maya was no stranger to standing up for herself or others. At 34, she had already built a reputation as a fierce advocate for her community. Whether it was organizing food drives, leading workshops on civil rights, or simply lending an ear to someone in need, Maya lived to make a difference. Her life wasn't easy. Raising 2 kids as a single mother while working full-time at a non-profit organization kept her busy. But she never let fatigue dull her spirit. Today, though, she felt uneasy. Something about the atmosphere in the courtroom made her senses tingle, as if warning her that things might not go smoothly. When her name was finally called, Maya stood up straight, smoothing her blouse and taking a deep breath before approaching the front. The judge, an older man with thinning gray hair and glasses perched on the edge of his nose, barely glanced at her as he motioned for her to begin. Standing beside her was Officer Greg Peterson, the officer who had written the ticket. He leaned casually against the railing, arms crossed, exuding an air of indifference. Maya knew his type all too well. Confident, bordering on arrogant, the kind of person who believed rules applied differently to them because of the uniform they wore. "Your Honor," Maya began, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "I'm here today to contest this parking citation. I believe it was issued incorrectly." She explained how she had parked legally in a designated spot, only to return and find the ticket slapped onto her windshield. She brought photos she'd taken immediately after finding the ticket, showing her car clearly within the lines of the parking space. Her argument was calm, logical, and backed by evidence. For a moment, she thought she might actually have a chance. But then, Officer Peterson spoke. His tone was dismissive, almost mocking as he interrupted her mid-sentence. "Your Honor," he said, not bothering to look at Maya. "This is a waste of everyone's time. She's just trying to get out of paying a fine." His words hung in the air, heavy and condescending. Maya paused, forcing herself to stay composed. She turned slightly toward him, meeting his gaze with a level stare. "Officer Peterson," she replied evenly, "if you'll allow me to finish presenting my case, I think you'll see that." Before she could complete her sentence, he cut her off again. This time his voice carried a sharper edge, laced with sarcasm. "Oh, sure, go ahead, let's hear more excuses." A few people in the gallery exchanged glances, sensing the tension rising. Maya clenched her fists briefly under the table, reminding herself to stay professional. She continued explaining her side, carefully laying out each point. Yet every time she spoke, Peterson found a way to undermine her, rolling his eyes or making snide remarks under his breath. Then came the comment that changed everything. In a voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, Peterson muttered, "Typical, always playing the victim card." The words hit Maya like a punch to the gut. She froze, her mind racing as the weight of what he'd said sank in. Victim card? Was he implying she was lying? That she didn't deserve to be heard? Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but also with anger. How dare he reduce her valid concerns to some stereotype? Before she could respond, the judge gave a quick wave of his hand, signaling for the proceedings to move along. Without giving her a chance to address the insult, he ruled against her, citing insufficient evidence to overturn the ticket. As Maya gathered her belongings and stepped out of the courtroom, she felt a swirl of emotions, humiliation, frustration, and most of all, disbelief. How could someone in a position of authority behave so disrespectfully? And why had no one stopped him? As she walked through the crowded hallway, replaying the scene in her mind, a spark ignited within her. She couldn't let this slide. Not for herself, but for everyone else who might face similar treatment and feel powerless to do anything about it. That night, unable to sleep, Maya sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through articles and forums online. She typed keywords like police misconduct and courtroom abuse into search engines, hoping to find stories similar to hers. What she uncovered shocked her. Dozens of complaints had been filed against Officer Peterson over the years, many alleging the same patterns of behavior: verbal abuse, racial insensitivity, and outright arrogance. Most of these cases had gone nowhere, dismissed due to lack of concrete evidence or buried under layers of bureaucracy. Maya realized she wasn't alone in feeling wronged, and she wasn't going to let this injustice fade into obscurity. By morning, Maya had made up her mind. She wouldn't back down. If the system refused to hold Officer Peterson accountable, she would find a way to make it happen herself. With newfound determination burning in her heart, she picked up her phone and dialed the number of Marcus Lane, a lawyer she'd met at a community event months earlier. Little did she know, this decision would set off a chain of events that would shake the entire city to its core. Maya spent the next few days consumed by a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and determination. She couldn't shake the memory of Officer Peterson's words or the dismissive way the judge had handled her case. It wasn't just about the parking ticket anymore. It was about something much bigger. As she sat at her kitchen table late one night, surrounded by papers and notes, she realized that this moment could either break her spirit or fuel her fight for justice. Maya chose the latter. Her first step was to dig deeper into Officer Peterson's past. If what she suspected was true, that he had a history of misconduct, he wouldn't be the first person in power to get away with bad behavior simply because no one held him accountable. Maya started small, reaching out to friends and acquaintances who worked in law enforcement or had connections within the legal system. At first, people were hesitant to talk. Some warned her not to stir up trouble, reminding her how difficult it was to take on someone like Peterson. But Maya pressed on, gently but firmly explaining why this mattered so much to her. One breakthrough came when an old friend from college, Lisa, agreed to help. Lisa worked as a paralegal and had access to public records that might shed light on Peterson's conduct over the years. Together, they combed through court documents, police reports, and internal affairs files. What they found was staggering. There were multiple complaints filed against Peterson, dating back nearly a decade. Some came from individuals who claimed he used excessive force during arrests. Others accused him of making racially insensitive remarks or acting aggressively without cause. In almost every instance, the complaints had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, or worse, swept under the rug entirely. The more Maya read, the angrier she became. These weren't isolated incidents, they formed a pattern. And yet, despite all the red flags, Peterson remained on the force, unchecked and unchallenged. Maya knew she couldn't tackle this alone. She needed someone with expertise, someone who understood how to navigate the complexities of the legal system. That's when she remembered Marcus Lane. Marcus was a civil rights attorney Maya had met at a community event months earlier. He had given a passionate speech about holding institutions accountable and fighting for marginalized voices. Afterward, they'd exchanged numbers, though Maya hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now, as she scrolled through her contacts, his name stood out like a beacon of hope. Taking a deep breath, she sent him a text asking if they could meet. To her relief, Marcus responded quickly, agreeing to see her the following day. When they met at a quiet cafe near downtown, Maya laid everything on the table. She shared her experience in court, showed him the evidence she'd gathered, and explained her suspicions about Peterson. Marcus listened intently, nodding occasionally but mostly letting her speak. By the time she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "This is serious," he said finally. "If even half of these allegations are true, we're looking at a systemic issue here, not just one bad apple." He paused, studying Maya's face. "Are you ready for this? Going up against someone like Peterson won't be easy. You'll face pushback, criticism, maybe even threats." Maya didn't hesitate. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone who's been treated unfairly and told to stay silent. I can't let that happen." Impressed by her resolve, Marcus agreed to take on the case. Over the next several weeks, they worked tirelessly, gathering affidavits from individuals who had filed complaints against Peterson. Many were reluctant to come forward, fearing retaliation or doubting that anything would change. But Maya's persistence paid off. Slowly, people began to open up, sharing their stories. With her and Marcus, one woman recounted how Peterson had mocked her accent during a traffic stop, calling her un-American. Another man described being handcuffed unnecessarily after questioning why his son had been detained. Each story added weight to their growing case, painting a disturbing picture of repeated misconduct. While Marcus focused on building the legal strategy, Maya turned her attention to raising awareness. She knew the power of storytelling and decided to use social media to amplify their message. Late one evening, sitting cross-legged on her couch with her laptop balanced on her knees, Maya typed out a post detailing her experience in court. She wrote candidly about how Peterson had insulted her, how the judge had ignored it, and how she refused to let the matter rest. She ended the post with a call to action. "If you've ever experienced something similar, please reach out. Together, we can make a difference." Within hours, the post went viral. Comments poured in from strangers across the country, many sharing their own experiences with abusive officers or unfair treatment in court. Local news outlets picked up the story, interviewing Maya and highlighting the growing movement she had sparked. Supporters began organizing rallies outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and "No more excuses." The momentum was building, and Maya felt a surge of hope. But not everyone was supportive. Some criticized her for stirring up trouble, accusing her of exaggerating or seeking attention. Trolls flooded her inbox with hateful messages, questioning her motives and attacking her character. Maya tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the positive responses she received. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Was she doing the right thing? Could one person really make a difference? Whenever those thoughts surfaced, Maya reminded herself of the faces behind the stories, the men and women who had trusted her enough to share their pain. They deserved to be heard, and she owed it to them to keep going. With Marcus by her side and a growing army of supporters behind her, Maya began drafting a formal complaint to file with Internal Affairs. It was a daunting task, requiring meticulous attention to detail, but she approached it with unwavering determination. As the deadline for submission approached, Maya found herself reflecting on how far she'd come since that fateful day in court. What had started as a simple parking ticket dispute had transformed into something much larger, a crusade for accountability and justice. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small smile. Whatever happened next, she had already achieved something remarkable. She had given a voice to the voiceless and inspired others to stand up for what was right. With the complaint filed and the wheels of justice set in motion, Maya prepared for the next phase of her journey. The battle was far from over, but she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the days passed, Maya's resolve only grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. The overwhelming support from her community and strangers alike fueled her determination, but Maya knew that simply filing a complaint wouldn't be enough. To truly hold Officer Peterson accountable, she needed to think bigger and bolder. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by legal documents, news clippings, and notes scribbled on scraps of paper, an idea began to take shape in her mind. It started small, a flicker of inspiration, but soon it blossomed into something far more ambitious. What if she could use the very system that had failed her to bring Officer Peterson to justice? The thought excited her, even as it filled her with nerves. This wasn't just about proving he was wrong, it was about showing the world that no one, not even someone in uniform, was above the law. The next morning, Maya called Marcus Lane to discuss her plan. When he arrived at her apartment, she greeted him with a determined smile and gestured for him to sit down. "I've been thinking," she began, leaning forward earnestly. "What if we don't stop at filing a complaint? What if we go after him for contempt of court?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "Contempt of court is serious business," he said slowly. "It's reserved for behavior that disrupts or disrespects the judicial process. Do you think we can make that argument stick?" Maya nodded vigorously. "Think about it. His comments during my hearing weren't just rude. They were inflammatory and racially charged. They undermined the integrity of the courtroom and influenced how the judge ruled. That has to qualify as contempt, doesn't it?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his notebook as he considered her words. "You're onto something," he admitted. "If we frame it that way, we might have a shot. But it won't be easy. We'll need solid evidence, witnesses, and a compelling narrative to convince the judge." "That's where I come in," Maya said confidently. "I've already got affidavits from other victims plus video footage of similar incidents involving Peterson, and I'm willing to testify about what happened in court. If we present everything together, it'll paint a clear picture of his behavior." Marcus smiled, impressed by her preparation and conviction. "All right," he said. "Let's do this. But we'll need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to keep momentum going." Over the next few weeks, Maya and Marcus worked tirelessly to build their case. They pored over transcripts from her original hearing, highlighting every instance where Peterson had interrupted or insulted her. They reached out to the individuals who had provided affidavits earlier, asking if they'd be willing to testify in court. Most agreed, eager to finally see justice served. Meanwhile, Maya continued using social media to rally support, sharing updates and encouraging people to attend the upcoming hearing. As the date approached, anticipation built within the community. Flyers plastered across town announced the event, urging residents to show up and stand in solidarity with Maya. Local activists organized carpools to ensure everyone could get to the courthouse safely. By the time the day arrived, the atmosphere buzzed with energy and purpose. On the morning of the hearing, Maya woke up early, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anxiety. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that conveyed both professionalism and strength. A navy blue blazer paired with tailored slacks and sensible heels. As she stood in front of the mirror adjusting her earrings, she took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was doing this. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability, about proving that even in a flawed system, there was still room for fairness and truth. When she arrived at the courthouse, the scene outside was chaotic yet inspiring. A sea of supporters gathered on the steps, holding signs and chanting slogans like "Justice Now" and "No More Silence." News crews jostled for position, microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. Maya paused for a moment, taking it all in. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined her fight would grow into something so monumental. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Every seat was filled, and latecomers lined the walls, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of what was happening. The air buzzed with whispered conversations and nervous energy. At the center of it all sat Maya, flanked by Marcus and a handful of key witnesses. Across the aisle, Officer Peterson lounged casually, seemingly unfazed by the commotion. He smirked occasionally, exchanging quiet jokes with his colleagues. To anyone watching, he appeared confident, untouchable. But Maya knew better. Beneath his bravado lay arrogance, a dangerous flaw that often led people like him to underestimate those they deemed inferior. She intended to use that to her advantage. When the judge entered and called the court to order, the room fell silent. Maya watched as Marcus rose to address the bench, his voice steady and commanding. He laid out their argument step by step, presenting evidence of Peterson's misconduct and explaining how his actions during the previous hearing constituted contempt of court. Each piece of testimony added weight to their case, painting a damning portrait of an officer who believed himself untouchable. Then it was Maya's turn to speak. Standing before the judge, she felt a surge of emotion but pushed it aside, focusing instead on delivering her message clearly and concisely. She recounted the events of the original hearing, describing how Peterson's interruptions and insults had made her feel humiliated and dismissed. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted the racial undertones of his remarks, but she refused to let tears fall. Instead, she ended her statement with a powerful declaration. "Your Honor, this isn't just about me. It's about sending a message that disrespect and abuse of power will not be tolerated, not in this courtroom, not in our community, and not anywhere else." The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Maya finished speaking, he thanked her and adjourned the court for recess, promising to review the evidence thoroughly before making a decision. As the room emptied, Maya stepped outside, greeted by cheers and applause from the crowd. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. No matter what happened next, she had done everything in her power to fight for justice. Hours later, when the judge returned to deliver his ruling, the courtroom was eerily silent. Everyone held their breath as he announced his decision. Officer Greg Peterson was found in contempt of court and sentenced to 30 days in jail. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of disbelief and triumph. Peterson's smug demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by shock and anger. As bailiffs escorted him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. Justice had been served, at least for now. Though the victory was sweet, Maya knew the fight wasn't over. This was just one step toward a larger goal, creating lasting change within the system. As she left the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and journalists clamoring for interviews, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had proven that courage and persistence could overcome even the most daunting obstacles, and she wasn't done yet. The day of the showdown arrived with an electric charge in the air. The courthouse, usually a quiet and unassuming building, had transformed into the epicenter of attention. News vans lined the streets outside, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like metallic sentinels. Reporters jostled for position, microphones in hand, eager to capture sound bites from anyone willing to speak. Supporters of Maya filled the steps leading up to the entrance, holding signs that read, "Justice prevails," and "Accountability matters." The energy was palpable, a mix of anticipation, hope, and defiance. Inside, the courtroom was packed to the brim. Every seat was occupied, and those unable to find space sat along the walls or stood near the back, craning their necks to see what unfolded. The atmosphere buzzed with whispered conversations, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter or murmurs of disbelief as people speculated about how the hearing would go. At the center of it all sat Maya, calm but resolute, her posture straight and her expression unwavering. Beside her was Marcus Lane, his legal pad resting on the table, ready to argue their case. Across the aisle, Officer Greg Peterson lounged, in his chair, exuding an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He smirked at the crowd, exchanging quiet jokes with his colleagues, seemingly unfazed by the gravity of the situation. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The gavel struck once, signaling the start of proceedings. Marcus rose to address the court, his voice steady and commanding. He began by outlining their argument, that Officer Peterson's behavior during the previous hearing not only violated basic standards of decency but also undermined the integrity of the judicial process itself. As he spoke, he presented evidence piece by piece. Transcripts of the original hearing where Peterson's interruptions and insults were clearly documented, affidavits from individuals who had suffered similar treatment, and even video footage showing Peterson making racially insensitive remarks during unrelated incidents. Each revelation seemed to land like a hammer blow, drawing sharp intakes of breath from the audience. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others nodded knowingly, having suspected such behavior all along. Marcus didn't mince words. He painted a vivid picture of a man who believed himself untouchable, someone who wielded his authority not to serve and protect but to intimidate and demean. By the time he finished speaking, there was no mistaking the weight of their accusation. Officer Peterson had acted in contempt of court, and justice demanded accountability. Then came Maya's turn to speak. Rising from her seat, she walked slowly to the podium, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. For a moment she paused, taking in the sea of faces before her. There were supporters cheering silently with their eyes, skeptics watching, warily, and reporters scribbling furiously in notebooks. But most importantly, there were victims, men and women who had endured similar indignities and now looked to her as a beacon of hope. Drawing strength from their presence, Maya began to speak. Her voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of emotion. She recounted the events of the original hearing, describing how Peterson's dismissive tone and cutting remarks had made her feel humiliated and powerless. She spoke of the racial undertones in his comments, the subtle yet unmistakable implication that her concerns were invalid because of who she was. Her words resonated deeply, striking a chord with many in the room who had faced similar prejudice. But Maya didn't stop there. She broadened her focus, reminding everyone that this wasn't just about one bad officer. It was about a system that too often turned a blind eye to misconduct when it came from those in power. "I'm standing here today," she said, her voice rising slightly, "not because I want revenge, not because I enjoy conflict. I'm here because silence is complicity. If we allow behavior like this to continue unchecked, then we are telling others that it's okay, that they don't matter. And I refuse to accept that." Her statement ended with a powerful declaration. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who has ever been treated unfairly and told to stay quiet. It's about sending a message that disrespect, abuse of power, and racism have no place in our courts, our communities, or our lives." The room erupted in applause, though the judge quickly called for order. As Maya returned to her seat, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had said everything she needed to say, laid bare the truth for all to see. Now it was out of her hands. After a lengthy recess, during which the judge reviewed the evidence and considered the arguments, the courtroom reconvened. Tension hung thick in the air as everyone waited for the verdict. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm and deliberate. "Based on the evidence presented," he began, "it is clear that Officer Greg Peterson engaged in conduct unbecoming of a public servant. His remarks during the prior hearing disrupted the judicial process and demonstrated a blatant disregard for the dignity of this court. Therefore, I find him in contempt." Gasps rippled through the room as the judge delivered the sentence, 30 days in jail, effective immediately. The decision sent shockwaves through the crowd. Cheers erupted from Maya's supporters while others sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Across the aisle, Peterson's smug demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by shock and anger. Bailiffs moved to escort him out of the courtroom, but not before he shot a venomous glare at Maya. For her part, Maya remained composed, refusing to let his hostility shake her resolve. As the reality of the ruling sank in, the courtroom began to empty. Outside, the scene was jubilant. Supporters cheered and hugged one another, celebrating a hard-fought victory. Reporters swarmed around Maya, peppering her with questions. How did it feel? What's next? Would she pursue further action? She answered patiently, reiterating her belief that this was just the beginning. Holding one bad officer accountable was a step forward, but true change required systemic reform. She vowed to continue advocating for policies that promoted transparency, accountability, and fairness within law enforcement. Later that evening, as the adrenaline began to fade and the noise of the day receded, Maya found herself reflecting on everything that had transpired. Sitting alone in her living room, she allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Gratitude for the people who had stood by her, for the strangers who had shared their stories, and for the courage she hadn't known she possessed until she was forced to use it. This victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had dared to speak up and demand better. But Maya knew the journey wasn't over. While Peterson's arrest marked a significant milestone, it was only one battle in a much larger war. Tomorrow she would wake up and keep fighting, for justice, for equality, and for a world where no one had to endure what she and countless others had faced. As she turned off the lights and headed to bed, she smiled softly, knowing that she had already sparked something extraordinary. Change was possible, and she intended to be part of it. The days following Officer Greg Peterson's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions for Maya Thompson. The victory in the courtroom had been monumental, but it was only the beginning of what promised to be a long and challenging journey toward systemic change. As news of the ruling spread, Maya became a symbol of resilience and determination, a beacon of hope for those who had grown weary of fighting battles that seemed impossible to win. Yet with this newfound recognition came both opportunities and challenges. In the weeks after the hearing, Maya found herself thrust into the spotlight. Local newspapers ran front-page stories about her courage, while national outlets featured interviews where she spoke passionately about accountability and reform. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Justice for Maya and As Accountability Matters, as people from all walks of life shared their own experiences of injustice and praised her for standing up to power. For every supportive message she received, however, there were also detractors, trolls hiding behind anonymous profiles accusing her of seeking attention or exaggerating her claims. But Maya refused to let negativity derail her focus. She knew criticism was inevitable when you challenged the status quo, and she chose instead to channel her energy into meaningful action. One of the first things Maya did was hold a press conference at a community center near her home. Surrounded by supporters, activists, and members of the press, she addressed the crowd with grace and conviction. "This isn't just about one officer," she began, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "It's about a system that allows misconduct to go unchecked because it benefits those in power. We've taken an important step today, but we cannot stop here." She went on to outline her vision for the future, advocating for policy changes within law enforcement, pushing for mandatory training on racial sensitivity and de-escalation tactics, and creating channels for citizens to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement or cheered enthusiastically. By the end of the speech, several local leaders pledged their support, promising to work alongside her to bring these ideas to fruition. As momentum continued to build, Maya partnered with organizations dedicated to criminal justice reform. Together, they organized town hall meetings, workshops, and educational seminars aimed at fostering dialogue between communities and law enforcement. These events weren't always easy. Tensions often ran high, especially during Q&A sessions, where frustrated residents confronted officers about past grievances. But Maya remained steadfast, moderating discussions with patience and empathy. She believed that real progress required uncomfortable conversations, and sometimes forgiveness. Meanwhile, the fallout from Peterson's arrest sent shockwaves through the police department. Internal Affairs launched a full investigation into his conduct, uncovering additional complaints that had been buried or ignored over the years. Several victims came forward, emboldened by Maya's example, to share their stories publicly. The cumulative evidence painted a damning picture of a man who had abused his authority repeatedly, leaving a trail of hurt and mistrust in his wake. Eventually, Peterson was terminated from the force, a decision that sent a clear message. No one was above accountability. But Maya didn't stop there. She understood that true justice extended beyond punishing individual wrongdoers. It required addressing the root causes of systemic inequality. With Marcus Lane's guidance, she filed a class action lawsuit against the city, alleging institutional failures that enabled officers like Peterson to operate unchecked. The case garnered widespread attention, sparking debates about policing practices and the need for greater transparency. While the legal battle would take months, if not years, to resolve, Maya remained optimistic. Every step forward, no matter how small, brought them closer to lasting change. Throughout this period, Maya leaned heavily on her support network. Her children, though young, sensed the importance of what their mother was doing and took pride in her work. Friends and neighbors rallied around her, helping with everything from childcare to organizing rallies. Even strangers reached out, offering kind words or volunteering their time to assist with campaigns. Maya often reflected on how much stronger she felt knowing she wasn't alone, that so many others shared her vision for a fairer, more equitable society. Yet despite the progress, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders, Maya wondered if she was doing enough. Could one person truly make a difference? Would the changes she fought for endure? Or would they fade once the initial wave of enthusiasm passed? On those nights, she reminded herself why she had started this journey in the first place, not for fame or glory, but because she believed in the possibility of a better world. And if her efforts inspired even one person to stand up and demand justice, then it would all be worth it. By the 6-month mark, the impact of Maya's activism was undeniable. City officials announced plans to implement reforms, including body cameras for all officers, stricter protocols for handling misconduct complaints, and independent oversight committees to review cases of alleged abuse. Schools began incorporating lessons on civil rights and civic engagement into their curricula, ensuring that future generations would grow up understanding the value of accountability and equality. Perhaps most importantly, communities that had once felt powerless now saw themselves as agents of change, capable of shaping the systems that governed their lives. On a crisp autumn morning, Maya stood outside the courthouse where it had all begun. A rally was underway, drawing hundreds of people from across the city. Speakers took turns addressing the crowd, sharing stories of triumph and resilience. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she climbed onto the makeshift stage, greeted by thunderous applause. Looking out at the sea of faces before her, she felt a surge of gratitude for the journey, for the lessons learned, and for the countless individuals who had joined her along the way. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "When I walked into that courtroom months ago, I was scared. Scared of failure, scared of backlash, scared of what might happen if I dared to challenge the system. But something inside me said, enough is enough. And so I stood my ground." She paused, letting the moment sink in. "We've accomplished so much together, but our work is far from over. Justice isn't a destination, it's a journey. It requires constant effort, vigilance, and courage. So let's keep going. Let's keep speaking truth to power. Let's keep building bridges where walls once stood. Because when we stand united, there's nothing we can't achieve." As the crowd erupted in cheers, Maya allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This was more than a victory. It was a testament to the power of collective action. She had shown the world that ordinary people could spark extraordinary change, not through violence or hatred, but through persistence, compassion, and unwavering belief in the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. And as she stepped off the stage, surrounded by friends, family, and supporters, Maya knew one thing for certain: the fight for justice would continue. But for now, she allowed herself to savor the moment. A hard-fought milestone in a lifelong mission to create a world where everyone was treated with dignity and respect.